Coming up, Biden and Harris have given us an establishment, and Trump is now creating the anti-establishment. I'll talk about Trump's cabinet appointments and what they signal. Will Upton, the political editor at the National Pulse, joins me. We're going to talk about cabinet confirmations, recess appointments, and also Biden trying at the last minute to ramp up the war in Ukraine. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
As we move into the new Trump era, and I say a new Trump era because even though Trump was president before, you really get the feeling that this is Trump in his element. The last time Trump came in, he came in with a bold vision, but his approach to government was far more tentative. He brought in people kind of from the establishment, almost as someone who is feeling his way in a new domain. Remember, Trump was coming in from the outside, and we had never had so much of an outsider walk into the Oval Office. You'd have to go back all the way to Eisenhower. And let's remember, Eisenhower had been in the Oval Office a lot because he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in World War II. So he had interacted at the highest levels of government. Trump had had none of that. And the first time around, as I say, he had the approach of a novice. Not to mention the fact that he was repeatedly stabbed in the back by people who claimed to be loyalists but were undercutting him. This time, it seems Trump is quite determined to avoid that. He knows who believes in him. He knows who agrees with his agenda. He knows who is loyal to him. And he is picking not only loyalists, but he's picking people who are really going to shake up the way things are done in Washington, D.C. And it actually reminds me of an anecdote going back to the Reagan days. When Reagan first came in early 1981, his Secretary of State, Al Haig, said to him, well, you have to sign the Law of the Sea Treaty. And Reagan said, I'm not signing it. And Al Haig said, but it's been approved by both houses of Congress. Every previous president is for it. And this is the way it's done. And Reagan goes, well, he goes, but you see, Al, that's what this election was about. It's about not doing things just because that's the way they were done before. And I think with Trump, you have the same point, but being made in a far more dramatic fashion. Now, already the never-Trumpers who have built a reputation in demonizing Trump, in fact, have offered their services to the progressive donors on the left. Like, why don't you employ us? This is Bill Kristol, this dude named Charlie Sykes, Jennifer Rubin, Robert Kagan, so many others. Pay us well and make us your generals, because us being Republicans, we really know how to take this guy Trump down, and we'll do it in the name of the Republican Party. Even though most rank and file Republicans will call us traitors and sellouts and have nothing to do with us, we nevertheless can wear our old Republican badge and show up with our old George W. Bush t-shirt. And people go, well, wait, why is that Republican going after Trump? Well, this is what they sold their donors on, the Democratic donors on. And here's Bill Kristol. If Trump gets his way, we will have a defender of war criminals as Secretary of Defense. A Russian lackey as Director of National Intelligence, a criminal running the Department of Justice, and a crank promoter of quack remedies in charge of HHS. So you can see right here, these are the people. Not everybody's digging in, but these guys are digging in. Now, Kristol has a second quotation which I want to read, because this quotation actually gets a little closer to the truth of the matter. The first one is the usual hyperbolic propagandistic nonsense that we're accustomed to getting from Crystal. It's basically his bread and butter. And quite honestly, I think the guy knows better. He's an operator. He's a guy who would go to work for Goebbels if he had to, if it paid well enough. But here's Bill Kristol. This is a negation of government. An act of nihilism directed at the central function of each of our government agencies. This sets the theme for Trump's second administration, in which he is clearly setting out to break our whole constitutional order. Yes and no. Trump is not trying to break our constitutional order. He's actually trying to restore our constitutional order. But he is trying to break the modus vivendi, the way of doing things, the way of life that has been established by the Biden-Harris regime and really by the Democrats. They have created an establishment with an establishment's own way of doing things. And so when Bill Kristol says this is a negation of government, it is. It is a negation of government in that sense, the kind of government that these people have set up. An act of nihilism directed at the central function of each of the government agencies. Absolutely correct. So nihilism here, though, is nihilism, the word itself means kind of nothingness. But what we mean by nihilism is something different. What we mean is we want to blow up these agencies from the inside, and that can be done in a number of ways. Shutting them down is obviously one way. Decentralizing them is another way. You scatter them. Force all the people who live in Washington, D.C., hey, by the way, your agency is now in Provo, Utah. So you might want to be looking for homes in Utah if you want to keep working, because none of this remote working either. You got to show up 5 days a week. And then there are many other techniques that I fully approve of to demoralize bureaucrats. One way is just making them feel utterly worthless, making them feel like their lives are meaningless, making them feel like they're completely unappreciated. You got to remember that these are self-important, pompous asses, and a lot of them aren't even doing it purely for the money. They're doing it for the power. They love the idea that they've got a badge, they've got a lanyard, they've got a big briefcase, and they've got a bunch of papers, and they walk around looking to the left and right as if to say, here I come, the world is going to be different because of my upcoming 10 a.m. meeting. And you've got to basically say your 10 a.m. meeting is worthless. In fact, we're not going to be having any more 10 a.m. meetings. If you want to walk around with your papers, you can do that and pretend like you're going to a meeting, but there is no meeting to go to. In fact, you're not invited to any meetings from now on. These people will be like, what? No meetings? What is the purpose of my life? And then the correct answer to that is there is no purpose to your life. You'd be far better if you were to change professions, become, a plumber, a Uber driver. If you're a CPA, you can be an accountant. There are lots of productive things for you to do in the economy. What you are right now is a complete leech off of the U.S. taxpayer. That's your job. You're a parasite. You're a leech. And all we want to do is label you as such. Even if we can't get rid of you, we just want you to have a little sign on your back, parasite. So there are lots of effective ways to drive people out of government. And by the way, when I say drive people out of government, I'm talking about their people. Because their people have been running this place and running it badly. When they say things like, we need expertise, Dinesh, you can't deny the government relies on expertise. I'm like, of course we need expertise. But what we've been treated to in the past several years is bogus expertise, not genuine expertise. Health authorities that tell us falsehoods about vaccines, FBI experts who end up spying on American citizens and framing them in order to do a political hit on behalf of a political party. That is, in one case, it may be experts who don't know what they're talking about. In the other case, it is deploying expertise for nefarious ends. It's kind of like a doctor who decides he's going to amputate your arm, even though you don't need your arm amputated because you're an enemy of the state, so-called. And so, is he an expert? Yeah, he does know how to amputate your arm, but your arm doesn't need to be amputated. Now, I think one of the reasons for the venom of the Democrats, particularly against RFK, also against Tulsi Gabbard, and to some degree also against Elon Musk, is this. Those people are Democrats. And they've been pretty lifelong Democrats. Certainly in the case of RFK is the most obvious. This guy carries the name of the most iconic family in the Democratic Party. And all of these guys were pushed out by the left. The same, by the way, could also be said about the podcaster Joe Rogan. If you remember in his earlier days, Joe Rogan was like a Bernie Sanders guy. He liked the idea of being an outsider and challenging the government, but he was doing it kind of from the left. And then he realized that the left is actually the party of the FBI. And the CIA. So what happened is that the left lost these guys. At one point, by the way, Obama was thinking of appointing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to a cabinet post. He didn't end up doing it, but it shows you that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was a mainstream figure in the Democratic Party. So was Tulsi Gabbard. She was, by the way, vice chairman of the Democratic Party in the Hillary era. So these are not people who were just nominal Democrats, blue dog Democrats, Democrats who somehow were senators in swing states. Not at all. These are people who are hardcore in the Democratic Party and then realize that the Democratic Party has, in a sense, left them, and they are now in the Trump camp. And so part of the effort to demonize them, to try to wreck them, is because they've inflicted so much damage on the Democratic brand. And they've done so much to create for Trump a coalition that is a MAGA coalition, but it's wider than MAGA. Those of us holding our breath for the past several months, we can now exhale with relief. What can finally be done on the major issues the country is facing? And one of the most significant is, of course, the national debt. And the fact is, our nation is largely broke, and the debt is a house of cards that can't quickly be dismantled. So the strategy for you, for me, remains the same. Diversify our savings. And that's why Debbie and I buy gold from Birch Gold. So many things are out of our control, even out of the president's control. In some cases, it's important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group, my gold company, will help you convert an IRA, a 401k, into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news, it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. Text Dinesh to 989898. Get your free information kit. Plus, right now, through Black Friday, you'll get a free 1-ounce silver eagle for every $5,000 purchased. Diversify your savings with Birch Gold. Text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your eligibility for free silver today. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. Think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm happy to welcome to the podcast a new guest, Will Upton, political editor of the National Pulse. He's a former Trump administration Treasury official. The website is thenationalpulse.com. You can follow him on X at WUpton, UPTON. Will, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. I don't know.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. I don't know if you saw this morning, there was a very interesting commentary by Morning Joe Scarborough, and his sidekick, Mika. Evidently, they asked Trump if they could come to Mar-a-Lago. Very interesting, right? I mean, these are guys who have been portraying Trump as a fascist. He's Hitler. So I guess it's now time to make an appointment with Hitler, right? And they make their way. And then they give this rather solemn account of, well, it was a very productive meeting. We expressed our concerns. We're going to keep channels of communication open. So what did you make of all this, and how do you think it's going to be received by the audience of Morning Joe that has been propagandized now for months, if not years, that this guy is Hitler circa 1933?
Well, it certainly isn't going to help MSNBC's ratings, anymore. I mean, they're already flagging, but no, they're kissing the ring. They're giving up the political theater, realizing that Trump has won this landslide victory, not just an electoral college landslide, but a popular vote victory as well. So they're doing what they have to do in order to sort of survive into the next era. You recall in 2015. Joe Scarborough and Mika were, Trump's best buddies up until he actually won the 2016 election. And then they went with all their media colleagues and turned on him and have ever since then compared him to Hitler, to a dictator, to every name in the book. And now that he's won again, this time, though, with an electoral mandate, they're I think, concerned. They're scared. They realize that they better make nice. Otherwise, they could be kind of on the receiving end for once.
Yeah, explain that a little bit more, because I was trying to think about what their motives are here, because they must have known. It's almost like you've been having your own audience drink all this Kool-Aid. And it's going to be a little difficult, having sold them on Trump as Hitler, to now come out and say, well, guess what? We're going to keep open lines of communication. Could it be, A, that the MSNBC top brass is worried that they are going to be so marginalized now that they need to move more to the center? Or B, Joe and Mika want to have access to Trump. In other words, he could cut him out of the White House briefings. He could basically treat them like they're non-entities and treat podcasters as if they are the new media. So keeping leverage with Trump could be a second motive, or there could be something I haven't thought of. What do you think it is?
I think it's a mix of both of those points. I think part of it is MSNBC executives realize that, they've probably shifted too far left. They're sort of upsetting your average voter, and their kind of shrinking viewership is just kind of these sort of kooky left wingers, and Joe and Mika wanting access. They realize that if they kind of get on Trump's bad side, they're going to be cut out of this. And I think the point you brought up with podcasters now having more access and more influence hits the nail on the head. If anything, this election has shown us that the sort of traditional media environment doesn't have the influence, doesn't have the impact, doesn't have the degree of sort of control that they like to think that they have over the American populace, and that most Americans are tuning into alternative media, whether it's podcasts or Substacks or kind of what have you. There is a sort of alternative media environment out there that is having far more impact in terms of news cycles and where people are getting their news.
But, even that being the case, I think that if it was anyone other than Trump on the Republican side, they would immediately be moving to accommodate this kind of mainstream media. In other words, they would not be bold enough to say, all right, guess what? Two can play at this game. You want to freeze me out, and you've tried to do that. You failed, but now I'm going to freeze you out, and let's see how that goes. So Trump, it's almost like a lesson in hardball, to use the name of one of the old MSNBC shows. Remember Chris Matthews and Hardball? Trump is playing hardball with these dudes, and it's working, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And there's been a lot of talk that sort of the traditional makeup of the White House briefing room is going to be really shaken up. They're going to try to get some of these sort of alternative media voices in there, get some of these folks into the room so that they can sort of be represented and ask their questions and bring news to their audience. Because again, you look at the Joe Rogan podcast, you're up over like 100 million views, according to Joe Rogan, between YouTube, Twitter, and Spotify of that Trump interview, versus you might get 1 million views on a primetime news show anymore, like on a given night, maybe. NFL games only bring in like 20 million viewers per game. You've got Joe Rogan bringing in 100 million people with eyeballs on that interview, or ears on it. And that's I think that's kind of ground shaking. And sort of reworks the map here in terms of media. But not all of them get it. I mean, I don't know if you saw Sunny Hostin's take on this, basically berating Mika for trying to make nice with Trump. Saying that, we can't, we have to dig in and continue to sort of be this aggressive oppositional media. And it's like, she's completely lost the plot.
Well, I mean, but it does go back to, when people were calling, let's just take the accusation Trump is a fascist. I'm assuming that there are some people in the left and maybe in the never Trump camp that genuinely believe that Trump is some kind of a tyrannical threat. This guy's a gangster. This guy, just unleash him and you'll see what he's going to do. And then there's another group of people who are, in a way, more cunning, that were using this as a smear, but they know better. Now, I'm kind of assuming that Joe and Mika fall into the second camp because their actions only make sense in the context of the fact that they never really believed it. Because if you really believed it, then this is not the right kind of follow-up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, like I wouldn't compare somebody to Idi Amin or to Pol Pot and then go have lunch with them the next day. That would sort of be morally very dubious, very questionable. But exactly, and I think Joe and Mika fall into that latter category. This was sort of political theater to them. But then you have your people like Sonny Hostin or Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post, who concerningly, I think, really drank the Kool-Aid and firmly sort of believe that there's this imminent authoritarian threat to America that we didn't see in Trump's first 4 years. We haven't seen any indication, even when he was out of office, from Trump, and we're not even seeing now. I mean, he's putting together a cabinet of sort of a team of rivals, various viewpoints, very diverse in terms of where they're coming from ideologically. Like this isn't what someone who is looking to install a fascist dictatorship would be doing, nor would they be appointing somebody like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to go and cut the size of government. That's the opposite of what a dictator would be doing right now.
That's so true. In the never Trump camp, it kind of surprises me a little bit because I thought of all of those guys as pretty smart and pretty opportunistic, and they are. And yet I think we now have to divide them into on the one side, you've got people like Bill Kristol, who I think fully knows that Trump is not a fascist. He's not a Nazi. He knows all that. It's just a cunning game that he plays to fire up the progressive billionaire donors to put money into his pocket. And on the other hand, you've got people like Robert Kagan and Jennifer Rubin, who evidently are crazy enough to believe their own, propagandistic nonsense and then work them. And then Kagan actually quits the Washington Post. Now, Jennifer Rubin kind of decided I'd rather take the paycheck and not do that. But nevertheless, would you say that this is the end of the line for the never Trumpers, or do you think that they will still be able to pull their con artist routine with the progressive donor class?
I think they'll try to, in Bill Kristol's case, I think it's both a question of money and influence. I think he sincerely believes that he's kind of caught the ear of certain, power players in the halls of the Democratic Party, and has a degree of influence there. And it was the same reason why he was sort of so active in Republican politics for so long. For him, it's about power and access. But for some of them, I think people like Kagan and others that sort of drank the Kool-Aid here, I think some of them will just sort of quietly go away because they feel defeated and they feel like there's nothing else left to do. Rubin will continue to write her sort of insane screeds at the Washington Post that nobody reads, but I don't really see much harm in kind of letting her do that, I guess.
No, I mean, basically, Jennifer Rubin and David French. I mean, David French seems to write a column every 6 weeks, essentially subtitled, "This time Trump is really finished." And I think he had one of those like yesterday. This time, with his appointees, he's really done it. This time he's really finished. So I find all of this very amusing. Guys, I've been talking to Will Upton. We'll take a pause and be right back. The story of My Pillow is a testament to faith and transformation. Mike Lindell, once battling addiction, found a new path when he embraced faith and began following Jesus. In gratitude, Mike is excited to share a really good offer with our viewers and listeners. Right now, the standard My Pillow is available for just $14.88. It's a savings that's too good to pass up. There's a limit of 10 per customer, so don't wait to take advantage of this amazing deal. Now with promo code Dinesh. Mike believes God gave him the idea for My Pillow in a dream, and it's designed with your comfort in mind. The pillow holds its shape. It adapts perfectly to your unique sleep position, helping keep your neck aligned for the best night's sleep. And there's more. Good deals all around. Take home a 4-piece kitchen set for just $25. Enjoy the new mattress topper starting at just $99.99, or pick up the luxurious MyPillow bed sheets starting at $49.98. Here's the number to call, 800-876-0227. Again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Use promo code Dinesh to unlock huge discounts. Don't miss out. Order today. Guys, it's a new era, and if you'd like to support my work, the best way to do it is to subscribe to my Locals channel. Become an annual subscriber for a modest cost. I post lots of exclusive content on Locals, including content that's censored on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored. You can see a personal side of me, and you can interact with me directly. I do a live weekly Q&A every Tuesday. No topic is off limits. I've also got a movie page on Locals with some very cool films. 2000 Mules is up there, the film from last year, very relevant, Police State, and of course, you know about the latest film, Vindicating Trump. If you're an annual subscriber, you can stream and watch this movie content for free. It's included with your subscription. So check out my channel. It's dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. I'm back with Will Upton, political editor of The National Pulse. The website is thenationalpulse.com. Follow him on X at WUpton. Will, let's talk about Biden and this last minute, late in the day decision to kind of unleash Zelensky in Ukraine and tell him that it's okay to start using some long-range missiles. Now, number one, seems to be a little bit of odd behavior for a lame duck president to be doing. Could it be that the Biden people think that they can accomplish something in this short window other than just get a bunch of people killed or bring the world closer to the edge of some more cataclysmic war? What do you think I'm assuming this isn't Biden's call individually, that the other people steering the canoe are making these calls. But what do you think their motives are?
I think it's two things. One, it's legacy. It's that they think that they can try to get some sort of movement here in Ukraine's favor, as diluted as that really is. I mean, we've seen new casualty estimates that are much higher for the Ukrainians. They've lost a lot of ground here with this Russian offensive towards a couple of these significant rail hubs. But I think their thinking is that if they can sort of escalate the war a little bit further by allowing these deeper strikes into Russian territory using long range missiles, that it will turn the tide, that it will bring Russia to the negotiating table before Biden leaves office, and that Biden can sort of use this as a capstone. And I think that there is another faction within this, the Biden administration, the Biden government, that wants to leave a massive international crisis on the doorstep of Donald Trump when he takes office, and just up the ante here and let him deal with it. And it was kind of a final, middle finger to Trump on their way out the door. I think that's very concerning.
Yeah, I heard Blinken say, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, something like, we're going to make sure that every last dollar of those $100 million gets over to Ukraine before January 20th. So there's clearly a desire to do everything they can up to the point where they are literally shown the exits and have to exit the administration. The Putin thing doesn't make sense to me, because if I were Putin, I would just go, well, there's a change of regime. So even if, first of all, Putin's not exactly, the Russian bear is not exactly up against the wall begging for mercy. But even if it were, I would be like, I'm just going to hang in here for a while. Pretty soon these clowns are going to be out of office. And then it's a new day for me. So the strategy seems very self-defeating. But do you think they might, you're suggesting they're just doing it almost like a malicious, let's stir the pot even further, and then we'll see what Trump can do with it.
Yeah, you get that kind of feeling, and I think that there's, especially at the State Department, there is, and especially among the careers at the State Department, career civil service employees, there's a sort of revenge mentality right now because of the Afghanistan withdrawal and the timetable that Trump had set, and then Biden's complete bungling of it. that led to the death of 13 U.S. soldiers and in countless Afghanis. And the Taliban's swift takeover of Afghanistan. So I think that there's a certain sort of revenge mentality among some of these folks at the State Department that said, hey, they sort of feel like Trump left them with a mess, which, I mean, he didn't. He gave them a timetable and sort of a blueprint to follow. But so they're now going to leave him with a mess in terms of Ukraine and see how he gets out of this one kind of mentality that they've got over there. And I think it's a very real concern. I think that's something that, you kind of see permeate, especially with that sort of permanent career class at the State Department.
Let's talk about the Trump appointments, the cabinet appointments.
Yep.
And I got to say that there seems to be a whole different mood and strategy behind these appointments than we saw in 2016. Do you agree that Trump is, essentially saying, listen, number one, I faced a lot of disloyalty in my earlier crew. Mm-hmm. Lots of people stabbing me in the back. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. But second of all, I'm going to appoint a real group of commandos here who are going to take the battle into these agencies and departments and do some real root canals, if you will, rooting people out, putting them out on the street, creating something more than the cosmetic change that we've come to expect from, by and large, what you would call typical Republican presidents.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think that he's looking towards very significant and very serious government reform, especially in sort of that has impact on the U.S. economy itself and key U.S. industries. RFK going to HHS is going to have a tremendous impact on both nutritional labeling, on sort of nutritional requirements and the food supply, and on pharmaceuticals. One of the big things that people kind of keep pointing to that he might tackle here is, pharmaceutical advertising on television, and whether or not they're going to continue to sort of be able to advertise all of these drugs on television, or whether or not you just be a conversation between you and your doctor, and sort of whether or not this is going to be how America kind of operates moving on with this over-medicated society where we're having all these drugs kind of pushed on us by an industry that's sort of motivated out of just pure profit, not necessarily out of the health of Americans. Or if we're going to change that and try to be a more healthy people, less medicated and better physical health. I think RFK is sort of the emblematic of that mindset of what Trump's looking at with his appointees. And again, I think you have sort of a team of not necessarily rivals, but you have a diversity of viewpoints that Trump is bringing into this cabinet, so that you can kind of hear, all sides of an issue, all opinions on an issue, all options on the table, and that he can sort of then synthesize that and make a decision as the chief executive. So I think that's going to be, very important moving forward.
What would you predict is going to be the fate of these nominees? There appears to be a kind of a smear campaign brewing that is targeting with different degrees of intensity. I mean, I would say that their number one target seems to be Matt Gaetz.
Yes.
Their number two target maybe is either Tulsi Gabbard or RFK. And then after that, I would say Hegseth. These are the four people that they've got in their sights. They're not too worried about Rubio. I think Rubio is going to sail through. And as you know, you've got some fairly, moderate, wavering Republican types in the Senate. You saw that in the leadership vote, right? In other words, Cornyn and Thune get a lot more votes, and certainly together they get twice as many votes as Scott, as Rick Scott. Right. And then there is also this question of recess appointments. So do you think that Trump is likely to have to resort to the recess appointments? And how does that actually work? What really is a recess appointment?
Yeah, so I think in some instances, if we get to a point of deadlock within the Senate and you've got essentially 4 votes that won't budge, remember we have 53 Senate seats. If it's a 50-50 tie, Vice President-elect Vance will break that tie and the nomination will go through. But if we can't get to that 50 vote threshold, we're going to have to resort to recess appointments. So there's a constitutional provision that allows the president to temporarily appoint somebody to a cabinet position or an office to appointed position, that essentially they're allowed to remain in that state. The Senate has to be recessed for 10 days. So they have to require a minimum of 10 days. And if they're out for more than 10 days, the president can fill a vacancy. And that person serves until the end of the next Congress, until the start of the next Congress, which roughly rolls out to about a calendar year. Now, that in theory can be extended for another 210 days because that person can then be made acting, whatever position they're appointed to. So in the case of like Matt Gaetz, let's say, he would then become acting attorney general. And that's under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. So because he was appointed, and this gets really tricky because technically they're supposed to be Senate confirmed, but we have a ruling from the DOJ dating back to 2002 under George W. Bush involving Eugene Scalia as the Solicitor of Labor. And Scalia was a recess appointment. And then he was made acting, and the OLC, the Office of Legislative Counsel for the Department of Justice, ruled that Eugene Scalia could then serve as acting under the Vacancies Reform Act, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. So you could serve another 210 days. So you can pretty much get almost 2 years out of a nominee before they really do have to come up for Senate confirmation. And there's also, Jeff Clark was talking about this, who's the former acting Attorney General of the United States, served at the very end of the Trump administration. He was acting. The president can actually adjourn Congress and force them into a recess if the two houses, if the House and the Senate disagree about the timing or the length of an adjournment or a recess. And so he can then set how long they will be out. So if we can set this up and say the House of Representatives and move for a recess, even if the Senate doesn't want to, if the two disagree, the president can theoretically adjourn them. That hasn't happened in a long time, but it is in theory doable.
And does that have the disadvantage of, presumably Trump has legislative priorities that are going to require the two houses of Congress to meet and to confer and to act. So it doesn't seem to me to be a very good idea to have these guys in semi-permanent adjournment, if you know what I mean. So it seems like there's going to be a little bit of balancing to be done. But I would think also that particularly now when you control the executive branch, senators and congressmen want innumerable favors from you, right? Mm-hmm. The donors want to come and see the president, and they want to be invited to state dinners, and they want to be included in delegations, and they want to be consulted on things. And so if the Trump administration plays sufficient hardball with the Republicans, particularly pointing to the fact that a lot of these Republicans, for example, voted for Merrick Garland. I mean, Look what we got with Merrick Garland. And they voted for Merrick Garland. Why? Not because they agreed with him, but they basically said, well, the president has the right to have his own cabinet. We may not agree with Merrick Garland, but we're going to give Biden the benefit of the doubt. So are you literally saying that Matt Gaetz is more dangerous to the country than Merrick Garland over the past 4 years? I mean, that's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. And I think ultimately, a lot of these guys, I don't think will have to resort to recess appointments necessarily on. Again, you consider the scale in which Trump won the 2024 election. I think it has a lot of members of the Republican caucus in the Senate sort of spooked a bit. Some of these guys are coming up for re-election in the midterm in 2026. And people sort of forgotten. Susie Wiles said this when Trump's last rally in Michigan. She said this would be his last campaign rally, but not his last rally. So that implies he may use the bully pulpit of the presidency to go out there. And if you've got a senator that's sort of digging in against his agenda, he can use sort of that popular appeal that he has to really turn up the heat on some of these guys. And we've already seen this with Bill Cassidy, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, who's up for re-election 2026. And he is now the Senate Sherpa for RFK. He was the first senator out the gate to endorse RFK. And Cassidy voted to impeach Trump. And so he's trying to make nice. He's trying to head off a primary challenge already. And so his sort of, olive branch of peace is to sort of help Sherpa through RFK and try to get this nomination done. So we're hoping to see a lot more of that out of some of these senators.
Very interesting. Guys, I've been talking to Will Upton, political editor of The National Pulse. The website is thenationalpulse.com. Hey, Will, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dinesh. Yep, thank you.
I'm talking about my book, The Big Lie, now out in paperback. And we're in the opening section of the book where I'm discussing the way in which the left and the Democrats rewrote the history of fascism and Nazism to cover up its and their tracks. But how do you go about doing that? How do you go about rewriting history in this way? There's got to be a kind of strategy to it, and it turns out that there is. So, the first step is to suppress altogether that fascism and Nazism are and were systems of thought. In other words, to suppress the idea that we're dealing in the case of fascism and Nazism with an ideology. Because if you admit it's an ideology, that is like Marxism is an ideology, conservatism is, I suppose, an ideology, progressivism is an ideology. But if you say something is an ideology, you then have to go ahead and spell out, well, what do the people in this ideology believe? What are the ideas that hold them together? Problem for the left and the Democrats is once you start spelling out the ideas, people go, well, that sounds a lot like you. That sounds like these people are akin. They are relatives. Their ideas have a family resemblance to the ideas of progressives and the ideas of Democrats today. So you have to begin not by changing the ideology of the fascists and the Nazis, but pretending like ideology itself is unimportant. Here is a left-wing historian, Dennis Mack Smith, quote, "Italian fascism originated not as a doctrine, but as a method, as a technique for winning power. And at first, its principles were unclear even to its own members." Let's think about the sheer idiocy of this statement. What he's basically saying is that the fascists became a movement. What were their ideas? Well, they didn't have any. What did they tell their members? Well, they just gave them a bunch of garbled slogans, and the members themselves didn't really know what they were in for. But they all wanted power, and basically fascism was a technique for gaining power. Well, this is a way, this has the benefit of stripping out the ideology from fascism, even if that is not, in fact, what actually happened. Here's historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat. This is a woman from New York. I think she teaches at NYU. She's very, she writes about social media. Basically, every day she takes what Trump does and goes, "This is the standard hallmark of an authoritarian." So this is her tedious, repetitive, everyday post. Look, I told you, this is what authoritarians do. Even though the things that Trump is doing are things, she'll say things like, Trump is surrounding himself with loyalists and people who only agree with him. This is what authoritarians do. Well, I'm thinking to myself, isn't this what everybody does? Did Reagan surround himself with people who hated him? No. Reagan, by and large, picked people who were loyal to Reagan. One reason Reagan picked Bush as the vice president is that Bush had shown that he was a very loyal guy. Obviously, Biden was loyal to Obama. Kamala Harris was loyal to Biden. Eric Holder and Justice was very loyal to Obama. So this is not exactly a fascist trait. But this is how these people operate. So here is historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She says, fascism, quote, is one of those words that is very hard to define precisely. What? Hard to define precisely? It wasn't hard for the fascists. It wasn't hard for the people who responded to what the fascists said. She says the reason fascism is hard to define is because, quote, fascism is all about contradictions, and this kind of ambiguity has remained in fascism. Now, it's not important to delve into the little pirouettes and pyrotechnics by which these scholars engage in this kind of dialectic. What is important is to notice the big picture of what they're doing. What are they doing? They're taking an ideology and emptying it of all its content, very deliberately. Why? in order to remove the leftist signature that is unavoidably present in that content. So the only way you can do this, first of all, you can only do it later, because the fascists were actually around in the old sense, and Mussolini would laugh at them and go, that's not, all you have to do is read my book. You'll see it's full of ideology, and these are the things that I believe. You have to not take the fascists seriously themselves. And here is the Berkeley historian A.J. Gregor, and he says, under the crabbed influence of the Marxist analysis of fascism, he's referring here to the left, fascist statements are never analyzed as such. They are always interpreted. Fascists are never understood to mean what they say. As a consequence, there has been very little effort to date to provide a serious account of fascism as an ideology. This is a very profound observation by a very wise historian, and what he's saying is that if you want to understand anybody, and this is, by the way, a very good principle in history generally, because so much of history is the historian telling you they said this, but this is what they really meant. So, for example, the ancient Greeks believed in the Greek gods, but they couldn't really have believed in them. It's Greek mythology. We have to understand this as a Greek form of poetry. No. For the Greeks, it wasn't poetry. The Greeks believed that there was a place called Mount Olympus and that the gods were real. So part of the problem here is that when you understand other people, let's say you're trying to understand in the Amazon, people are doing a rain dance because they want to bring about rain. The historian today will tell you, well, that's silly. And we all know that rain dances don't bring about rain. Really, the reason that they're doing the rain dance is not because of that. They don't really believe it's going to bring about rain. What they're actually pursuing is communal solidarity. They're trying to come together as a community so that they can kind of all engage in a common pursuit together. No. The reason that these people are doing a rain dance is that they believe that appealing to the gods in this way will produce rain. So what you're getting here, and you see this in the case of fascism, if you want to understand fascism, listen to the fascists. Who were they? Who started this movement? What were its doctrines? I mean, if you're trying to understand Marxism, you do that. You'd say, it was founded by this guy Marx. Well, what did he believe? Well, let's read Das Kapital, and let's read the Marx's essays on Hegel, and let's go on and read the Communist Manifesto written by Marx and Engels, and then we get a pretty good idea of what these guys were actually selling, what it is that they believed. Now, here is how you know that the left is lying about fascism and Nazism. They're ascribing to the fascists and Nazis generic tendencies, typically authoritarian tendencies, that you could find in many other political doctrines. Authoritarianism, militarism, nationalism. Now, again, authoritarianism is an ancient feature of mankind. Obviously, ancient kings were authoritarian, but they weren't really fascists or Nazis. Militarism, Alexander the Great was militaristic, but he wasn't really a fascist or a Nazi. Nationalism, the founders, let's just say, of Italy, Mazzini and others, Garibaldi, they were nationalists, but they were hardly fascists or Nazis. So this is the problem. They are trying to give you a fake fascism so as to remove their own identification with it. Now, one way you can expose the scam, and I do it here, is I say, look, we know the name of the philosopher of pretty much any major political movement, right? So who's the philosopher of capitalism? And most people would answer correctly, Adam Smith. Now, you can give other answers, Ricardo and so on, but Adam Smith is sort of the main guy. All right, who's the philosopher of Marxism? Well, Marx. So now I ask you, applying the same reasoning, who is the philosopher of fascism? And it turns out you can't say. In fact, very few people can say. We don't know. Virtually no one knows. And so the point is that the reason we don't know and we can't say is not because no such philosophical founder of fascism exists. In fact, I'll be introducing him to you in this book, but it's because the left has chosen to write a historiography of fascism that leaves this guy out, pretends like fascism is not a movement of ideas, because after all, if you say, oh yeah, this guy's the philosopher of fascism, we'd be like, okay, well, what did he believe? Let's read his works. And the man in question is a voluminous writer, a very household name in Germany and in Italy and all over Europe for decades, and yet has vanished into the mist of history because of this cover-up operation that I've been talking about. Now, the final point I want to make, and I think I'll probably save this really for tomorrow, is the interesting role of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism that is native or intrinsic to Nazism, but is not intrinsic to fascism. And the reason this is important is you begin to see a particular clue from Hitler's own anti-Semitism. Hitler's anti-Semitism, as it turns out, was a form of anti-capitalism. You never read about this. This is part of the left's cover-up of Hitler. But you'll see when we pick it up tomorrow how anti-Semitism is a way of turning hatred, yes, toward the Jew, but why? What does the Jew represent? For Hitler, the Jew represents the capitalist par excellence.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.